Let's talk about the Russian Revolution of 1917. You probably think you know the story, right? The Tsar gets overthrown, Lenin and the Bolsheviks sweep in and take over. Simple. But what if the real story is that more than 100 years later, historians can't even agree on what actually happened? We're talking about one event, but two completely different tales. And today, we're going to figure out why.
Okay, so the whole debate really boils down to this one huge question. What was the Bolshevik takeover in October 1917? Was it a genuine popular revolution, the masses rising up and demanding change? Or was it a masterfully planned coup, basically a power grab by a small, organized group of radicals?
On one side of the ring, you've got historians like Richard Pipes. For him, it's an open and shut case. He calls it a classic coup d'etat. Just a small band of conspirators seizing control with almost nobody else involved. Basically, a top-down takeover.
But then you flip the coin and you get a totally different take from someone like Edward Acton. He argues that no, you've got it all wrong. It was the massive popular support for what the Bolsheviks were saying that made their victory so quick and so easy. This is a story of a bottom-up revolution, driven by the people.
So you have to ask, right? How is that even possible? How can two smart people look at the exact same set of events and come away with two completely opposite conclusions? Are they just picking and choosing the facts they like? Well, the answer is a little more complicated, and it gets to the very heart of how we understand history.
And it all comes down to this word, historiography. I know, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's the history of history. We're not just looking at what happened in the past, we're looking at how people have written about it over the years, and why those stories are always changing.
This quote from François Furet really nails it. He's talking about the French Revolution, but it applies perfectly here. Historians aren't these totally objective machines. They're people. They have perspectives shaped by the times they live in, their own politics, where they're from. As Furet says, they have to show their colors.
So, with that idea of historiography in our back pocket, let's jump back to Russia and dig into these two competing stories. This is where the debate gets really interesting.
But first, you gotta understand what Russia was like in early 1917. I mean, it was an absolute pressure cooker. You had 80% of the population as peasants living in poverty. The cities were packed with factory workers facing brutal conditions. And on top of it all, World War I was a complete disaster. We're talking millions of casualties, no food. Trust in the Tsar had totally collapsed. The whole country was just waiting for a match to be led.
So out of this chaos, we get the first major historical interpretation. It's often called the liberal school of thought, and for them, the story is all about a coup from above.
This quote from Leonard Shapiro just perfectly sums up their view. See how the focus is on a group of determined men? It's all about Lenin, the political elites and their ideology. For this school, there's a straight line from Lenin's power grab in 1917 all the way to Stalin's brutal dictatorship. It's a story about top-down control.
But then, starting around the 1980s, a whole new generation of historians shows up and says, hang on a minute. They were called the revisionists, and they argued that everyone was looking in the wrong place. The real story, they said, wasn't happening in the halls of power, it was happening in the streets.
Sheila Fitzpatrick, one of the leading revisionists, gives us a totally different picture. In her view, the Bolsheviks weren't some all-powerful masterminds. They were more like expert surfers who saw this massive wave of popular anger and just knew how to ride it. Their real strength wasn't their organization, it was that their radical message, peace, land, and bread, was exactly what the people were desperate to hear. They caught the mood of the crowd.
So let's just put it all side by side. You have the liberal school, they see a top-down coup and focus on the leaders. Then you have the revisionist school. They see a bottom-up revolution and focus on the workers, the soldiers, the peasants. Same event, but two completely different ways of seeing it.
So the big question is why? Why did the story change? How did this revisionist view pop up and challenge the story that had been dominant for decades? Well, it turns out that history itself changed the story of history. There were some major game changers.
If you look at this timeline, you can see a really clear pattern. Back in the 30s, you had the official Soviet story. Everything was perfect and inevitable. Then, bam, the Cold War kicks off, and in the 50s, the liberal school comes into its own, painting the revolution as the evil origin story of their totalitarian enemy. By the 80s, social historians start the revisionist challenge. And then, the world changes.
You really can't overstate how much the Cold War influenced all of this.
For Western historians writing in the 50s and 60s, the Russian Revolution wasn't just some dusty old event. It was an ideological weapon. That coup story was a perfect way to argue that the Soviet Union was illegitimate from the very beginning, born from a conspiracy, not the will of the people.
And then came the moment that changed everything. 1991. The Soviet Union collapses, and for the very first time, the state archives are thrown open. I mean, all of a sudden, historians had access to this mountain of new evidence. People's diaries, letters, local government records, things that told the story from the perspective of ordinary people, not just the party bosses.
And this, of course, just poured gasoline on the fire. Some of the old guard, like Richard Pipes, kind of shrugged and said the new material didn't change much. But for revisionists like Jeffrey Swain, it was total vindication. They argued this new evidence overwhelmingly proved their case for a bottom-up revolution, showing just how deep the popular anger really ran in 1917.
So who was right? Was it a coup or a popular uprising? Well, the real verdict is something bigger. It's that history isn't just a set of facts carved in stone. It's a loud, messy, ongoing argument. We've moved away from an era of single official stories, whether they came from Moscow or from Washington, to a much more complex and, frankly, more interesting understanding of the past.
It's like the historian Ronald Grigorsoni said, historians cannot stand outside history. They're products of their own time and place, just like the rest of us. How they saw 1917 was shaped by the Cold War, by the social upheavals of the 1960s, and of course, by the fall of the Berlin Wall.
And this image, for me, just captures that idea perfectly. It's from an exhibit marking the 100th anniversary of the revolution, and it was held in the Winter Palace itself, the very site of the takeover. They projected modern images right on top of these old traditional paintings. It's such a powerful metaphor for what we've been talking about. Every new generation layers its own questions, its own perspectives onto the past.
So we'll leave you with this to chew on. If the story of the Russian Revolution isn't one single story, but a whole collection of them, and if every story we tell about the past is really an interpretation shaped by the present, how does that change the way you look at history? All of it.